attendees, and it takes a little while. We have quite a few of you RSVP'd for this sunny December afternoon. So just give us a few minutes as folks load in. And if you're watching this on the live stream outside of Zoom, welcome to you as well. So again, welcome everyone. I do see the attendee count still climbing, so we'll just wait another few seconds. And things do seem to be slowing down a bit, so thank you everyone. Welcome to our December Grad Division Town Hall. I'm Jillian Hayes, Dean of the Grad Division, and I am very excited to welcome all of these panelists here this afternoon. We are super excited to talk to you about the wonderful progress that UCI has made, as well as all of our plans for the things that we need to do to make even more progress in our areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we do have a really great group here. If you haven't been to one of our town halls before, the format is that each of our panelists will introduce themselves and say a few words for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up. You can please write into the Q&A on your Zoom screen. If you are attending on one of our live streams and not on the Zoom, unfortunately, we can't easily get the questions from you that way. So this is your opportunity to hop off and come over to Zoom if you think you've got questions that you might want to ask. And if you're watching this after the fact on recording, we can't go back in time. So you can't ask questions either. But thank you everyone for joining us this 1 week before the quarter ends. We're very excited to share some great information with you and get your thoughts and feedback and answer questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist to introduce himself, Doug Haynes, our Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which I think I've just done those in the wrong order according to his official title, but he runs our Office of Inclusive Excellence as well as being a professor in history, and we're so excited to have him. Over to you.
Thank you, Dean Hayes, so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I not only wear the hat as Vice Chancellor, but I'm also a professor of history. And I really am grateful to be here at this town hall as we begin to close out the academic year. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you. I know this has been a very challenging year for you. And I do hope that you know that people are working hard to try to improve the situation.
Thank you so much, Doug. And with that, I will hand it over to our Dean of Students, Rameen Talash, who, if you haven't been watching his videos during COVID, first of all, I want to highly recommend you do that. But we'll let him talk about some more.
Thank you, Dean Hayes, for embarrassing me right off the beginning, but I appreciate that. I'm Rameen Talash. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Life and Leadership here at UC Irvine and Dean of Students. I've been here for about 14 years, coming back in 2006, though I worked here in the 90s for 5 years, and I did my undergraduate work here in the 80s, so I've just outed myself on all fronts. I will say that Dean Hayes asked me to be a part of the panel. Are we doing introductions now, or are we going to go straight into our couple minutes?
You can go straight into your couple minutes. It's probably easier. We can circle back to Doug if he has some more comments as well.
Okay, great.
Oops.
So the majority of the time, the centers that I work with in student life and leadership, we actually have 16 centers, 16 different units. And so Dean Hayes thought it might be actually important for me to just share what some of those centers are for our graduate community, because maybe many of you don't know what those centers are, maybe didn't know that some of these centers even exist on the campus. And though we certainly are geared and primarily our primary users are undergraduate students, we certainly do have partnerships and collaborations and graduate students that interface with many of our centers. And we actually enjoy that. We want to see more of that, whether it's in coaching or mentoring phase, whether it's just advocacy and being involved and engaged in the topical issues, and or just for a sense of connection or belonging, which we know is very important for all of our students, whether you're graduate or undergraduate. So, I thought I would just share a little bit, real quickly, what our units are. And specifically some of our resource centers, especially. We have our International Center resource, which is actually taking care of all the compliance issues, but also serving graduate students, undergraduate students, and researchers on the campus. Our LGBT Resource Center is available on the campus as well. Our Veteran Services Center serves students who are reentering veterans. Our Center for Black Cultures, Resources, and Research is led by Dr. Adisa Ajamu, and is a fantastic center that works with our Black students and has lots of great partnerships within their academic schools with some of our graduate communities as well. Our Women's Hub is available and accessible to students here at UC Irvine. Our Dream Resource Center, working on behalf of our undocumented community, and especially has been through a very much a roller coaster time period here the last few years, but really hoping and trying to work hard on behalf of our student populations, both graduate and undergraduate. Our Latinx Resource Center is one of our newest centers available, so we're looking to kind of energize that and continue efforts in broadening the scope of the work being done there. Our Cross-Cultural Center is one of a unique center, and Jade Turner, an alum of the Cross, could speak a little bit to that, but serves all of our student communities and a great place of advocacy and social justice work going on there at all times. We also have our Fresh Basic Needs Hub, and then there's a list of others. And of course, student government has now moved under the umbrella of Student Life and Leadership. So our AGS, our friends in the AGS are also a huge component of that. So I'll try to stop there. But maybe that allows you to think of some questions that you might have about some of the work being done in those centers, and hopefully I can speak to some of that. And if not, I will certainly get the answers for you. So thank you.
Thank you. And as a reminder, please do go ahead and start popping questions into the Q&A. We won't pause the introductions to answer them, but I do encourage you, just as the speakers are speaking, drop things in and we can start going through those shortly. And since he did such a nice segue, let's go to our cross-cultural alum, Jade Turner, who works with us here in Grad Division.
Nice little transition. Thank you, Rameen. Thank you, Jillian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jade Turner. I am the Decade Plus coordinator in the Graduate Division. For those of you who are not familiar with Decade Plus, it is a program that is a collaboration between the Graduate Division and the Division of Undergraduate Education Student Success Initiatives. It is an extension of our Decade program, which a lot of you may be familiar with. It stands for Diverse Educational Community and Doctoral Experience, partnering in leadership for undergraduate students. And so I run that program. We have undergraduate students who are primarily students of color, low income, and first generation students that are mentored by undergraduate peer mentors, as well as graduate student leadership coaches. And so it's a pretty comprehensive, very intensive mentoring program where undergraduate students receive direct guidance from graduate students. So it's pretty unique in that way. I've been in my role for just over 2 years now, went by pretty fast. I'm no stranger to the UCI campus. As it was mentioned, I used to work at the Cross Cultural Center as the student development coordinator and then as the associate director. I've been affiliated with the UC Irvine campus for a number of years, since 2005, when I began my undergraduate journey in criminology, law, and society. I also worked in the Center for Educational Partnerships, in the School of Social Ecology, in the School of Law, and then ultimately returned years later after I went to graduate school. I'm a counselor by training, and so a lot of my work around diversity, equity, and inclusion on the campus, outside of a lot of the things that I do with Decade Plus, is centered around approaching things from a holistic perspective. I always kind of weave health and wellness and self-care and communal care into the work that I do with students and into my advocacy efforts, both personally and professionally. And so pretty familiar with the campus, but I also bring a pretty broad perspective around DEI because I worked on a number of different campuses in California and in Georgia, community colleges, four-year public universities, both the CSU and the UC, as well as private universities. And so seeing how all of the different entities within higher education and in the work that I've done in the nonprofit sector approach the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, I think has been really beneficial to what I can bring to the campus and the graduate division at large. A couple other things I want to mention, particularly for the faculty and a lot of the students who are probably on this session. some of you might recognize me from the MEP program that the graduate division has. So it's the Mentoring Excellence Program. It's a certificate series that we offer. I facilitate the mentoring across different session, which focuses really on identity and intersectionality and thinking about identity salience and cultural competence for our graduate students and postdocs who want to kind of expand their knowledge and awareness, particularly around serving underrepresented or underserved students, what that looks like, how to do it effectively. I also moderate the inclusive environment cultural competency session for the PALS Academy, which is focused on postdocs. So some of you have probably seen me in those spaces. I also do a lot of just general DEI work, facilitation, workshops, presentations. I've been asked to do different workshops for academic departments and other offices across the campus, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. And so, of course, if I'm at capacity, I can't say yes to everything, but it is something that I like to do. So feel free to just reach out to me if you want to collaborate with us on anything. I think I have a really unique perspective in terms of being able to be invested in the success of not just our graduate students and postdocs, but also our undergraduate students, and then also being engaged in a lot of efforts across the campus that think about diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly. For instance, like the Black Thriving Initiative, which I'm sure Doug can speak more about, but how we as a whole are approaching this conversation as a campus community with regard to our climate and our culture, and how it affects even faculty and staff, right? Because the students are of primary concern. I'm very student-centered, but faculty and staff ourselves, we bring our own communities and our own identities into our spaces, into our relationships, into how we work with students. And so it's important to make sure that we all as a community are able to thrive. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Jade, and thank you for the generous offer. Yes, we in Grad Division do very much want to collaborate with other folks across campus, so please take her words to heart there. I'd like to transition back to the Office of Inclusive Excellence, where we started, to Roxanne Silver, who is a professor in social ecology, as well as runs a variety of programs within Inclusive Excellence.
Thank you, Jillian. I was actually thinking that maybe Vice Chancellor Haynes would like to go first in talking about the Office of Inclusive Excellence broadly, and then I can speak specifically to what I do.
Oh.
Do you want to just go, and then I'll pipe in afterwards?
Oh, terrific. Well, again, the office that I oversee is the Office of Inclusive Excellence. And it really does four things in sort of leading and coordinating the campus commitment to creating a campus around inclusive excellence. And so we provide campus accountability. Who are our students? Are they thriving? Can we improve? The second is we provide education and training to really create a more culturally dexterous campus community. We also provide regular responsive research. We are a research institution. And so as part of that, we're a learning organization. And so we really do use data to understand how well are we performing? How well are we serving our students? And the fourth thing that we do is strategic partnerships. We are a federally designated minority serving institution by virtue of our Hispanic serving designation, as well as our Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving designation, and our robust relationship with historically Black colleges and universities. And so through those four functional areas, we really try to advance inclusive excellence throughout the campus, in the academic core, but also in partnership with student affairs, as well as grad division. You may have more direct contact with our office through decade mentors. Those are the faculty members who are in the school, in the academic programs. And with that, I want to sort of hand off to my colleague, Dr. Roxy Silver, who's the Associate Director of the Faculty Decade Mentors Program.
Thank you very much, Doug. So I just wanted to let Vice Chancellor Haynes give an overview of the Office of Inclusive Excellence. As Jillian said, I am a faculty member in the Department of Psychological Science, and I have a joint appointment in public health and medicine as well. I've been on the campus since late 80s. And so I have preceded the Office of Inclusive Excellence, which was stood up about 5.5 years ago. But I have been in the Office of Inclusive Excellence for 5 years, where, as Doug mentioned, I oversee the Decade Mentor Program out of the Office of Inclusive Excellence, as well as work with Graduate Division on the Decade Program more generally. And Jade just actually said what decade means, but you just said it as if you knew it. I actually have to have a piece of paper to see that what exactly it stands for every time I say it. It's the Diverse Educational Community and Doctoral Experience. It's a program that was started by Frances Leslie over a decade ago, and it's a collaboration between the Office of Inclusive Excellence and Graduate Division. Each graduate program on the campus has a decade mentor. We have 43 decade mentors that oversee about 54 PhD or MFA programs on the campus. And we have between 1 to 3 graduate student representatives from each of the doctoral programs and MFA programs on our campus that attend monthly meetings in which the students really serve as representatives and conduits between the campus administration, as well as the faculty and decade mentor in their unit and their department as a whole. So just very briefly, Decade has the goal of advancing inclusive excellence by increasing participation and retention of women and underrepresented minorities in graduate programs on our campus. And Decade provides students with a supportive community, as well as professional development and leadership opportunities. And as I mentioned, there's a student council where students serve as representatives to their individual programs. Decade mentors, which are the faculty members who are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion amongst their units, work with their graduate admissions committees to ensure that we admit a diverse student body. And then once the students join our campus, our Decade mentors work with the graduate students to ensure that they thrive and succeed. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go on, but that's the sort of the general overview of our program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was really comprehensive and smooth transition between you. So well done, Town Hall panelists. Last but not least, I'm very excited to introduce our still new, we're going to keep calling him new, he's only been in it about 5 weeks, Associate Dean in Graduate Division, Rodrigo Lazo.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Rodrigo Lazo. I'm a professor of English. I work in American literature and Latinx literature and cultures. And I've been at UCI for about 16 years, have had some different positions, including most recently, I was director of the Humanities Core Program, which, as some of you know, is the first year introduction to the humanities that usually enrolls somewhere between 800 and 900 students. So that was a very rewarding position because there was a lot of intellectual content to it. So I am excited to start this position. I'm still learning my way around and trying to figure out all the different moving parts that we have going here. But I just want to share with you why I decided to apply for this position is that having been at UC Irvine some time, I realized that there was a lot of need right now among graduate students for different kinds of support and understanding given some shifting conditions that actually preceded COVID. I like to remember that before COVID hit, there was some turmoil in graduate education. UC Santa Cruz was shut down for quite a bit because of different strikes among graduate students. And that was a movement that was crossing the UCs. So there was a lot of concern about living wages among graduate students. I think that's something that that really interested me in terms of what was happening. Once COVID hit, the terrain shifted, but I think that we're all still dealing with a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And so Just really briefly, one of my goals in this position is to not only continue to work on questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then continue to improve our admissions of a more diverse student body, but also to help the retention of our students who are here so that they may not only complete their programs, but excel and go on to have a ongoing career. So I hope to have conversations this year with graduate students, faculty, particularly those who mentor students, in terms of what we can do to continue to try to help students and address some of the very real needs that graduate students have right now that are shifting. I mean, for me, I've been at UCI long enough to see how graduate education has changed just even over the last decade. So I welcome the opportunity to talk to you, R. Lazo at uci.edu. So please send me a note, or I'm always happy to chat with anybody about your concerns or get your input.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was having a little trouble with the mute button here. So for those of you who read my emails, you'll know that I destroyed a laptop approximately 1 week from today. So I'm still getting used to where all the controls are on the new one. And if you didn't, now you have your delights are to go back and read my old emails and see that story. So thank you to those of you who have already started asking some questions. In one of the cases, those are questions I was able to answer in the chat, but we do have one that it seems would be useful to go ahead and engage here verbally. And I will just remind all of you to please drop questions into the Q&A. If you think that your question is one that no one else has, I doubt that is true. I always find that if you have this question, someone else does. So please do the whole community the service of going ahead and asking the question in the Q&A section of the Zoom box so that we can go ahead and answer those things. So the question here was about the imperative to fully fund all accepted applications, and does this potentially disincentivize going after other grants and fellowships and so on? And so I just want to make sure that everyone knows what we mean by the fully fund piece and all of that, because you may, depending on who you are, you may not be aware of what UCI does. So we were the first in the UC system to implement a program in which PhD students and MFA students in nearly all of our programs do have an offer to be fully funded, typically a couple of years in the MFA programs, the length of the program essentially, and for 5 years in PhD programs. And what fully funded means is tuition fees and a stipend for the 9 months of the academic year throughout your time here. And I think it's a great question about, does this disincentivize students going after other kinds of fellowships? It's something that we've been watching closely in grad division in terms of both external fellowships, things like NIH pre-doctoral fellowships, the Ford pre-doctoral fellowship, corporate fellowships, and so on, as well as our internal ones here, of course. We do find that submissions don't look substantially down for the sort of continuing fellowships, if you will, students that are already here. For students that are incoming, things like the Graduate Opportunity Fellowship that was mentioned in the question in the chat, the Eugene Cotter-Robles Fellowship and others, those are actually done by faculty. So we hope that you have loads of incentive to apply for them on behalf of the students, because that saves you money in a case where we would actually be taking those things on. So I just want to make sure you know that we're kind of watching this. The other thing that we're watching very closely right now is it, I'm not entirely sure what Daryl's asking me here. Unable to apply without accept. That's true. You can't apply for fellowships on behalf of the students until you've accepted them. We do expect you to commit to accepting them. That is accurate. But you should still be incentivized to do it because you've committed to pay for them, right? So happy to talk with folks in more depth, but I'm wondering if anyone else on the panel would like to weigh in on sort of things that we can do to encourage students to go after fellowships, even in an environment where we do commit to funding them, because we do, of course, think that commitment to a funding package is an important stress reliever for folks. And maybe if anyone wants to comment on that as well. It looks like Roxy might have some comments just because she's nodding along, so I'll pick on her.
I will say that many of the units on our campus, as well as graduate division, have offered opportunities for students to get assistance in writing fellowships, such as for the National Science Foundation, GRFP, as well as the Ford Foundation. So there are opportunities for our students who are interested and encouraged to apply for these fellowships, to get people who already have these fellowships to comment on their materials. Our campus has really been quite impressively committed to ensuring that as many students as possible succeed on the applications for external funding. I know in my department, as for one example, it's expected that students submit applications to the NSF GFRP if they are eligible for that. And we even have opportunities for students to get faculty input in courses. For example, the course that I teach, I provide feedback to students on their application materials. So I think that there are ways in which the individual departments can encourage our students to apply for these fellowships. But in addition, Grad Division has webinars and they have one-on-one mentoring for students to apply for these external funding. Now, I know Daryl is in arts, and so many of the MFA students are not eligible, of course, for the doctoral, the PhD NSF proposals. But there are, I believe, some opportunities, as Jillian was mentioning, for all of our graduate students to apply for. And I certainly encourage the units to encourage their students to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We got a series of questions about a specific piece of legislation that's working its way through the U.S. government at the moment. None of us on this call are authorized in any way to speak for the University of California on specific legislation, but I wondered if some folks might like to speak to the particular ways in which we do believe that international students add to the diversity and the excellence of our university. And I will ask Dean Rameen first if he minds commenting, because the International Center, of course, is a very important part of our student affairs organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, as a campus and as a university, we believe in the education that we receive here um, is stronger when we have people from different walks of life. And that means different socioeconomic standing, that means different cultural backgrounds, and that certainly even includes our international population and students coming from around the world, and how they can add so much value to the classroom experiences in whatever field. And so certainly that has been something that, I think we as educators understand and appreciate. And has certainly been under attack recently. And I think that has been disappointing to see the lack of leadership coming from the federal side of the house these last few years, in terms of the attacks being made on our international community, and even specific communities within our campus, and even more so beyond the international community. So I think this is an area of concern. It's an area where I think the university has taken strong stances in the past on a variety of different topics. I'm not necessarily as knowledgeable about the specific legislation that was brought up, but I know that we're continuously battling right now, it feels like, and pushing back on legislation that is targeting students and international students, as well as our undocumented community, as well as our LGBT community, as well as our Muslim students, as well. It can go on and on. Our Black students. So I think that this is an area of concern, and as educators, we have a responsibility to ensure that and reflect on what's going on our campus, and how can we remove barriers to our students in their student success here at this institution. And so that's constantly something that we need to be working on, reevaluating, and re-energizing around supporting our students in their experience. So I think that's how. But certainly from someone that oversees the International Center and has great respect for our colleagues that work in the International Center. I absolutely see the value of our undergraduates, our graduate students, as well as our researchers and scholars that come from all over the world.
Thank you so much for that. And I also want to ask if Rodrigo wants to add anything, because I know international students is one of the things he's been thinking about since taking on this position in terms of diversity within grad division.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges right now, as Rameen Talash was saying, is that we've been under a lot of pressure from different changes coming down at the federal level, and that just adds to different levels of pressure that graduate students feel, whether they're international or even domestic, right? And so one of the things to keep in mind, even as we think about international students, and for me at the graduate level, is that they add so much intellectually to our community, right? And so for undergrads, that's just a kind of like greater diversity in terms of being able to have interaction with people who may be coming from other countries. I know even when I was an undergraduate student, I loved my international student friends. I mean, they would, share, I would learn from them. At the graduate level, graduate students from other countries contribute in significant ways to some of our programs. As a matter of fact, some of our programs really believe in the importance of bringing in students from other countries in order to keep a kind of intensity in terms of the research being done there. And so part of what we need to continue to do is to be sensitive to the kinds of pressures that these students are feeling just right now, particularly with sometimes uncertainty as to how different things are going to be handled in relation to things like residency and how COVID may affect the ability to be here. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those helpful comments. We have gotten some questions in the chat, so thank you to all of you sending those along. Because it got one upvote, I'm going to go with one of our more recent questions rather than going in the order. But there's a question here for efforts that we might have centrally, and I'll turn this to the Office of Inclusive Excellence, for any kind of outside hires to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the schools, to help facilitate trainings, and help with hiring practices, or in other ways serve as support mechanisms, as opposed to the traditional model of our equity advisors and decade mentors and other folks who are all internal to us.
Interesting. That's a really intriguing question. I think at this point, to the extent that we reach out to consultants, whether they are vendors, whether they mount specific trainings or programs, they do add value. They serve as a supplement to our fairly robust internal efforts that revolve around for our faculty, for equity advisors, and for our graduate programs, decade mentors. I think one of the reasons why the focus has been utilizing trained faculty who have a demonstrated commitment to inclusive excellence in these spaces is precisely because they know the internal processes, as well as they engage in what's called peer-to-peer engagement, where they bring not only a familiarity with the field, but they're also known among their peers. And so it's a form of nudging, right? But I'd like to point out that that's complemented by a whole host of other actions. And so we really try to utilize the best evidence-based programming that's available externally to really supplement our efforts on campus. But I have to say, we can always grow, and we're always growing, and we can certainly always improve.
Jillian, I'll just mention one other thing, which Doug was alluding to. All of our equity advisors and decade mentors get training throughout the year on specific topics that are relevant. And so we often bring in outside speakers and outside consultants to help us. In the case of the equity advisors and decade mentors, we meet for a few all-day events as well as throughout the quarters. So I do want to point out that these are individuals who are selected because of their strong commitment to these issues and their individual commitments as faculty, but also they repeatedly provided with materials, resources, lectures, and guidance throughout their terms in these roles.
Thank you so much for that. And I'll just add to that, I'm super interested in this notion. If you've got experts that you think we should bring in to do a webinar or do some other consulting, like, please reach out to us, point us to their names and so on. We did start a new talk series this year that we will be doing. We just did a couple weeks ago with Dr. Maricela Martinez Cola, who wrote a beautiful piece on allyship for those of us who are white mentors working with BIPOC students that I recommend you read if you haven't already. And she came in and did a webinar with both faculty and students, it's 2 separate webinars. And we have 2 more of those planned. And I apologize, I don't have the names to hand with me right now, but those are in collaboration with the Office of Inclusive Excellence as well as academic personnel. So if you have ideas for things like that, please just email them over to anyone on this panel and we'll make sure they get to the right place. We're very excited to work with you on those things. So let me turn it over to a great question that I'm not actually sure who would be the right respondent on this one. So we'll see if anyone jumps in and volunteers. But the Division of Career Pathways has formed a new DEI committee, as many of our divisions and schools have done. And they're very interested in how they can expand their services and think more about graduate students over there. So the question is, what are some of the core topics and areas for graduate students on our campus when thinking about professional development specifically and their career from a diversity and inclusion standpoint? So if I haven't got any volunteers, I will call on someone, but let me pause for a moment, see if any of our panelists want to jump in.
I raised my hand.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'll weigh in. I think this is particularly important. I think when you look across the landscape of higher education, there's a number of trends. And one that is very obvious and growing and accelerating is the diversity of our undergraduate population and by extension, our graduate student population. And I think that this is important because the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, really is a competency, a skill that enables people to really work in diverse environments. Because it's one thing for an organization to be diverse, to have many people from different backgrounds. It's actually different to be an organization that's committed to inclusive excellence, where people can bring their whole selves. And I'll just illustrate this. It's increasingly required now for advertised faculty positions for applicants to submit a diversity statement or an inclusive excellence activity statement. That's what we do here at UCI, where they're really describing the ways in which DEI has informed their choices, even while graduate students, as well as prospectively, how they intend to draw on that experience and competency as a faculty member in their research, if it's applicable, and in their service. And so just in terms of a basic notion of professional identity, it's becoming more important as an expectation, as a threshold to get across, right? But more than that, I think it's important to remember that we inhabit communities. And if we lack the ability or the capacity to create inclusion, we're pretty much an organization with a lot of different people, but they don't work well together and they don't benefit from the richness that they bring.
I could speak to that too, Jillian, if I may. One of the things that I've seen come up a lot amongst graduate students that I've worked with over the years, both in the grad division and at the Cross Cultural Center, is thinking more broadly about the career possibilities for graduate students, whether they're getting a master's degree or a PhD. Not every person who's getting a doctorate necessarily wants to become a faculty member. right? And so what are some of the other options for them if they want to mainly focus on research or work for a government entity or start their own business and be entrepreneurial? I see a lot of our graduate students who are thinking outside of the box and wondering what else can they do, particularly because even right now, especially, a lot of the faculty positions are very limited. We have an influx of a lot of adjunct positions, which presents challenges. And so a lot of students are thinking outside of the box. If I don't want to necessarily become a professor or go into a role where my research and my scholarship is the main priority and not my teaching or not my service or some other things that I want to work on, what are some of the routes that they can take? You know, being at an R1 presents a certain level of expectation for faculty members, especially when it comes to how they get tenure, right? Being at a CSU, for instance, how they receive tenure is weighted differently with their teaching, with their research and their scholarship, and with their service. And then some students want to go on and do other things with their degrees. And so I think one of the things that would be really important for the Division of Career Pathways to think about from a DEI perspective is what are some of the other career options and possibilities for graduate students, particularly those who identify as women or Black, Indigenous, people of color. What are some specific opportunities and professional development skills and things that women of color in STEM could adapt and learn? I think I hear a lot from the Black and brown women in STEM on this campus, but across, I think it's a trend nationally, dealing with being a woman and a person of color in the STEM field and what that looks like, not only when they're studying, but when they go out into the workforce. And so if you want to be strategic or intentional about your efforts or where you can kind of focus some of your attention, I think that is an area that can be explored as well.
Thank you so much. Jade, I'm going to tell you to not take your mute off yet. Oh, I was too late because I've got one I'm going to direct at you next, which is there's a wonderful question here about we've recruited a really fantastic undergraduate population that are diverse and excellent and care about a lot of the values that we've been discussing today. Are there ways to engage with these folks to increase graduate diversity and inclusion? And the reason I want to pop it over to Jade is because she really is one of our foremost experts at Grad Division about working between the undergrad and grad population.
Okay. I don't know if you said anything at the end. I think you muted yourself, but I think I get the gist of what you're asking. And that's a really good question. When I saw that question, I immediately thought about Decade Plus and what we try to do. And so, especially given the population that we target, programs like Decade Plus really are twofold, right? So they are supporting the persistence, the transition, the acclimation, and the retention of our low-income first-gen students of color throughout their time at UC Irvine. But a big, big, big part of the program is also preparing them for what happens after graduation. And so I can't even count how many letters of recommendation I've written for students over the last couple of years who are applying to graduate and professional school, who are exploring different career options, who are exploring doing research and internships. And so we do a lot around professional development and networking, particularly from a really intentional perspective around their culture and their identity and what that means for them, what that means for how they'll be received and perceived by the world or by the spaces that they're entering. I do a lot of that with the students in terms of advising and coaching, but then we also train our graduate students and our peer mentors, our leadership coaches, to work with the students around those types of issues. And so what I see a program like Decade Plus as a pipeline program, right? So of course they have access to and information about the graduate programs at UC Irvine, as well as other campuses. And so really we want to encourage them to have a sense of direction and set them up for success wherever they choose to go, whether that be a graduate program at UC Irvine, which a lot of them do apply for, or graduate professional programs elsewhere. I see this type of program, which is, for some who don't know, it's funded by a grant from the Department of Education. We are in year 5 of the grant, so we're in our final grant year. And one of our main goals and commitments is trying to institutionalize the Decade Plus program and really broaden its reach so that we can tap into other populations of students that we haven't necessarily been able to target because of how the grant was written and the pool of students that are invited to participate in Decade Plus. I would love to see Decade Plus be a part of the Black Thriving Initiative, where we have an intentional focus on recruiting and assisting Black students specifically to have access to a program like this, with a diverse array of peer mentors and or leadership coaches who are graduate students who can really help guide them. I think it's really powerful for students when they have access to someone who not only has had mentoring training, right, and understands how to work with students generally, but someone who they can identify with, and someone who's kind of blazed a trail or a path that they themselves want to pursue. I think that's really powerful, and the research shows that that's really powerful. And so I see Decade Plus just as an example, as well as other programs on campus, like the Gateway Scholars Program and DOE Student Success Initiative. They also do graduate preparation as well, as those types of pipeline programs where we can increase diversity in those programs and make sure that we're doing our best to have representation and make sure that things are equitable within those pipeline programs, which will ultimately increase the diversity of our graduate population, whether it be at UCI or elsewhere.
Thank you so much for that, Jade. And if people want to get involved in any of these initiatives, particularly as we move to institutionalize them again, please do reach out. I want to throw it over to either Rameen or Rodrigo to see if they want to add anything. On the one hand, few people on this campus know our undergrad population as well as Rameen, so he may have some thoughts. And then I know Rodrigo's been thinking a lot about how we can improve admissions on the grad division side. So over to you guys.
Well, it's funny because I was teeing up all my answers, and Jade is so knowledgeable that she really spoke to all the things I would have talked about. Pipeline, certainly in many of our centers we work on mentorship and programs, and we have collaborative programs that work with other units on campus, and trying to coach and support students and seeing the opportunities available to them, seeing that they can be going on and getting advanced degrees and be that person in front of an audience, teaching and espousing knowledge at a later point. So, those are things that we get excited about. We want to connect students. We want them to be engaged. And then one of our core pillars is really about mentorship. And that's a lot of times student to student, from like a more seasoned student, maybe even a graduate student to an undergraduate student, but also from professional staff or faculty to student. It happens all the time. And so, and we don't even sometimes know it's happening. Students don't know it's happening, but they're being mentored at that moment. So, I think really, I wrote down little notes of all the things I was going to say, and Jay just hit a home run on her answer, really. But quite honestly, it is something that is a core of what we try to do. Of course, we're not trying necessarily to say we are intentionally trying to make everyone go and get a master's degree and a doctorate degree. That's not for everybody, and that's not something we're trying to do. But if students have an inclination, or if they have something that they have a spark of energy around, or they're excited about, then we want to cultivate that. We want to intentionally give them that support and guidance, and get them to the right people. And so, again, and then again, that's an area where we certainly would seek out even graduate students, faculty, staff that want to be a part of that mentorship, a part of that pipeline experience. And certainly we even do that a little bit in terms of even the outreach that we're doing with, K through 12, which we do. We have units that go out. Center for Educational Partnerships goes out, tries to cultivate relationships for students to see themselves going to the university, to a college. And like Jade said, really, we love it if they stay here at UCI. I know certainly there are students that go on to go to law school here at UCI, go on to get PhDs at UCI, and they're UCI lifetimers. But there's something that can be said, that the value of getting a diversity of experience, even outside of UCI, and we see value in that as well. So whether they're going somewhere else and they're just tapping into a whole new experience, whether it's inside the state of California, outside the state, outside the United States, wherever it may be, I think there's value there, and then they come back just more knowledgeable and more well-rounded even than before. So I think it was a great answer by Jade.
Jillian, if I may, I just want to share that what's so remarkable, I think, about our campus is that during the course, at least of my short career, a number of undergraduates have gone on to graduate school and have come back as faculty. So for example, in the Department of Art History and African American Studies, Professor Bridget Cooks was an undergraduate here. In the Department of Anthropology, Salvador Zarte went to UCI, got his PhD at UC San Diego, and joined the Department of Anthropology. I just was on a panel discussion with a faculty member in urban planning with Professor Gerelson. She was a student in the Humanities Honors Seminar, in my seminar. And so there is tremendous depth in our undergraduate population. There are remarkable graduate students, and we're sufficiently mature as a campus that we know how to identify talent. And so it truly is a pathway to growing UCI.
Thank you so much for that. We've got time for maybe one more question, which I think is a pretty broad one, but Doug will probably start with you on this, which is about what we're doing to sort of identify and recognize the various forms of contribution to diversity in the context. The question is about faculty of personnel actions and promotions. I will add to that, this is something we're thinking about on the grad student side as well, as many of our BIPOC students in particular are being called upon to step into leadership roles and so on. How can we support them? And I was very happy that Doug and Roxy and I were able to partner on a program last summer to reward those students who had been doing that work with the Inclusive Excellence Fellowship. And we're looking to try to do something like that again. But more broadly, I wonder if you could speak to this issue of how do we identify and recognize and reward these forms of contribution that are so important.
Thank you. I think one thing to bear in mind is that as a public research mission serving the residents of this state and reaching across the country and world, we have an obligation to be mindful about inclusive excellence, right? We still are at a very early stage. So now we expect applicants to submit a inclusive excellence activity statement that describes their activities. Faculty are able to describe their contributions to diversity as an option in their personnel cases, right? And so I think we have an awareness about diversity and its importance. I think now we need to move into another phase. And that phase is to see diversity, equity, inclusion, inclusive excellence as a competency, as something that is based in a knowledge base that we can equip ourselves with, that allows us to contribute to the ongoing momentum for change on the campus and in the communities we serve. Right? And so I think right now, the faculty are at an awareness phase, right? Because diversity is not a requirement, but it's still not a competency. And so I think OIE, Office of Inclusive Excellence, working with our partners in grad division and elsewhere, we're really trying to think through this, right? Because we not only want our faculty to be equipped, we want to be sure that our graduate students are equipped with this competency as well, because we want to reach a stage where creating, for example, a Latinx thriving university, a Black thriving university, right, matters as much to faculty who aren't Black or Latino, right? And so I think that's where we are. And I think it's just a constant conversation, of course, with the academic senate, but we also have to model what we say we want to be. And so I think there's definite room for improvement, but the key takeaway is we need to create a competency in inclusive excellence.
Thank you for those inspiring words for us to end on. That is perfect. And we are at just at the right time with just a couple minutes left. I want to encourage all of you who are here to keep the conversation going, both locally and also with any of the panelists here. I know them all well, and they're all eager to engage with folks on these issues. So please reach out to any of them. Also, I purposely scheduled my daily office hours for today at 4:15, so that for those of you, if there's anything that came up today that you'd like to have a deeper conversation with me about, you can come and join me at 4:15. The link is in the chat and also in the weekly messages for our students and postdocs on here. But also, Derek, our communications director in grad division, helpfully put the link for next week's office hours and the schedule in. So you can see not only the times you can come to talk to me, but also the times you can come to talk to AD Lazo, who you got a chance to meet today if you hadn't met him before. We really want to engage with you on these issues. So please come and talk to us. Those are dedicated times for anyone from UCI to come and talk to us. Grad students, postdocs, even faculty and staff, please come and let's discuss this further. So thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists and to the attendees who joined us. This is the moment where I give my standard disclaimer that if you're watching it after the fact, anything we may have said today may have changed between December 11th, 2020 and whenever you are watching this, but we still thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and stay safe out there.